Okay, I had a question about the bird nesting on the bottom of the fabric. So the first thing that you want to check um, is usually when your mechanisms are not threaded correctly. So first trick is if you are when you lift your presser foot up and you have resistance you have resistance from this being threaded. It's supposed to have resistance, which means it's threaded correctly. But if it pulls like too easy, then it's not threaded correctly. So the main problem would be is to check your steps. So from your top thread, make sure that all the steps are correct, which can cause the nesting underneath your fabric, or the gathering of the thread underneath your fabric. Once you've checked that, then you want to check your bottom bobbin by pulling the thread as well to make sure that the bobbin is twinding there, and it's going freely. After you've checked that, we'll talk about tension here in just a second, but the recommended tension should be between 1 and 2. That's recommended. I usually put mine on 2 depending on what I'm sewing, and my stitch length on 2. Those are just recommended, and of course you adjust those accordingly depending on what you're sewing. And if you check those and everything is threaded correctly, for this machine you would refer back to like page 14 to get your threading. This top spool, get it threaded correctly. And remember, we talked about the purple area, which is the bobbin, and the gray area being that it's the needle. And sometimes what I've found with this particular Singer machine, if you come down to number 3, you go back up to number 4 and back down, sometimes the threading can become intertwined, which can also cause resistance. So if it's too much resistance and you feel like the resistance is in here, rethread it. Come back to number 3, 4, back down, and thread your needle. And then try sewing again. Let's see. Okay. So those are the main areas. It's just making sure that this is threaded correctly. and that your bobbin is moving freely. So once you've done that and you start to sew, making sure that your stitch is on 2 and recommended tension is on 2. A lot of times the next thing that will be the problem is the bobbin thread and the needle thread, making sure that you kind of hold on to it not too tight, that it doesn't get stuck in your sewing. So you want to hold them not firm, but firm enough to when you start sewing and it's not going to entangle, then you can just let it go. Because a lot of times if these loose ends are caught into your sewing, especially at the bottom, it could cause the bunching of your thread as well. Okay, so these are the 2 ends that I was talking about. These are the 2 ends that you start out with your needle thread and your bobbin thread, to be sure that they're not entangled while you're sewing, because it could also cause gathering at the bottom. And then that's pretty much it, you know, other than making sure that your tension is set properly. And a trick to making sure also that your needle is not crooked, you could get like something flat like a popsicle stick and, you know, go around your needle and test to be sure that it didn't bend in any way, because if your needle is bent, it too will cause issues with your sewing. So that's pretty much it on that. Just holding these 2, your needle thread and your bobbin thread, holding it not too firm, but when you begin to sew, just enough so that you can start your stitch and that it doesn't get caught in your stitching. Let's see. Okay, so the next question was, now that's the top thread showing through the bottom. So like when you have bunching, your top stitch will show through here, your bottom stitch, which means that it's not threaded right, as we just spoke of. But if you have your bottom stitch coming up through the top stitch and you have the jumbled up thread on the top of your fabric, then it's something going wrong with your bobbin. Could be the tension is too tight. That's number 1. Sewing something this simple, again, recommended would be 2. For your light to medium fabrics, it depends on what you're sewing. I'll try and link a reference to the types of fabric, what type of needle it takes, and where your tension is supposed to be set. I'll try to link that if I can remember below. If there's someone that needs that guide and I forget to link it, just let me know. But remember, tension being too tight. So the lower the number, the tighter the tension. The higher the number, the looser the tension. So 1, of course, being tight, 2 being tight, and the higher you get up here, if it's on 9, that's how loose the tension is going to be. So lower the number, tighter stitch. Higher the number, the looser the stitch. And this is your tension button on this particular machine. Every machine is different. So you would have to refer to your instruction guide to see exactly where your tension button is, or tension dial rather. well, it's worth the bobbin. I'm sorry, talk about the bobbin not being threaded properly, which bringing it through the channel and back around to clip, and that it's pulling freely. And we talked about the tension being too tight. And another thing about the bobbin is to be sure that the bobbin size is correct. With this particular machine, it's class 15. If you get anything other than, it'll cause your bobbin not to move as free as it needs to move. It could be metal or plastic as long as it's class 15. So if I went too fast, if your bobbin thread is on top and it's gathering on top of your stitch, then be sure that your bobbin is threaded properly. Be sure that when you pull the bobbin thread that it moves freely and that the tension is not too tight. Let's see. Now, if your upper thread, if you're sewing and this upper thread, it breaks somehow. It could be that, again, your path is obstructed somewhere. It could be that you pulled this part around incorrectly, or somewhere up here is obstructed. It's not, you didn't do your steps down through the channel back up correctly. It could be knots in the thread. It could be tears in the thread already. I'm going to again try to link the types of thread below so that you know what you're buying. The number, the number on the thread. It'll tell you what type of thread. Usually when you're buying the thread, it'll tell you what type of thread it is. Just make sure it's not knotted somewhere, or that it doesn't have any like tears in the thread. Again, Walmart thread is the only thread that I found that pretty much it sheds. And so as it's shedding, like there's thinner parts of the thread over the shedding. So it'll be thin up here and then back thick down here. That's what I mean by shedding. Walmart thread is the only thread that I found that does that. And maybe because it's a cheaper thread. Excuse me, I'm not exactly sure. Just trying to think. Yeah. So the tension, the thread being obstructed or not being threaded properly could be the problem. So the lower the number, the tighter the tension, the higher the number, the looser the tension. Let me go back to the shedding because I don't want anyone to get confused. Typically, when the thread is shredding or shedding, whatever you want to call it, it's thinner in certain spots. It could be an old thread, something that's very old, has been sitting. It could be a cheap thread. A lot of times it could be that your needle is worn. So the eye of your needle, if it's worn, or if you have trash build up, it could also, your thread could be okay from this point, but when you get down to the needle part, that's where it could also start shredding your thread and cause it not to sew properly. So you might want to consider changing the needle or getting a different type of thread. And I don't know if you guys can see Oh, I'll show it later because I don't think that you can see it. I'm just going to show you a good deal that I had gotten at Walmart for $24, and it came with quite a bit of thread. If your thread starts, like if you're sewing and your thread start, I'm a little hungry. I'm sorry. I probably can't get my words out here. So if you're sewing, or if you begin to sew and it bunch up only in the beginning, that means you have a problem with your bobbin. So we've already discussed some things that could be going on with the bobbin, that it's not channeled correctly. It could be the wrong side. So typically the only thing that could be wrong when it's skipping stitches is that the needle is defective. It could be bent. It could be chipped at the bottom. Something could be going on with the needle, which will cause skipping in your stitches. And I think that was pretty much all of the questions. So I don't want to make this video too long. I'm going to switch the angle of my camera and we'll go over threading the machine at the top one more time. You know, if you want to stay for this part, because I do have a video where I was showing how to thread the machine properly. I'm going to switch angles just so you can see. Again, I'm doing this with one hand, so see, it's cut. Thread your needle from front to back. Oh, you see that? From front to back. Okay, so now I'm going to take the bobbin off. Remember, move this back. Remove that. I'm going to take the bobbin completely out. So let me cut it here. Now, you know the bobbin is going to go in with the thread that way. So it's going to be facing this way. I'm going to slide the bobbin in. Right. Going to bring it around through here. Through here. And remember to be very careful with this because this is very delicate. And bring it around through that channel. Around through here. Through here. And then you're going to snip it. Okay, so once you snip it, it should be cut with this. See if I can focus here. It should be cut with that. Okay. Put this back on. And now, so we have our top needle. It's threaded, correct? So now we're going to turn our hand wheel here. And watch the needle go down. back up. And let's see if we caught our bottom thread. Okay, we did. We caught the bottom thread. You see that thread that's hanging? Okay, so you see this is the needle thread, and you see this thread right here. That's the bottom bobbin thread. I hope I'm not all over the place. I decided to hold this with my hand so that you guys could see. So let's get some tweezers and pull this. Now you see it turning. So now that we have our bottom bobbin and we have our needle thread, this goes toward the back and it just hangs down like so. Don't tie it or anything. This is the position it's supposed to be in when you are starting to sew. So what I was talking about with holding the thread, let's see if I could do this. Let me let this down and let my feet down, and I'm going to hold this a little snug. Let's see, let's lift this back up. So I'm going to hold my two end threads here. And then I'm going to not pull it tight, but just enough to where it's not getting caught in my stitch. So just as I start to sew, I'll just let it go. Got my fabric, right? Let this up.